Now, Executive Suite with WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi.
Welcome to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nesi, and later on in the show, we're going to hear from the founder of Aquabotix, a growing startup in Fall River that's developed a new technology for taking camera footage underwater, which is something applicable in the Bay State and the Ocean State. But first, I'm pleased to be joined by two experts on how local demographic changes in the Providence metro area are affecting the economy and a lot of other things. Greg Almieda of Global View Communications in Pawtucket, and Linda Newton of Newton & Newton. Thank you, Linda. Greg, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And I want to start off, people, whenever someone has a consulting background, people wonder, what do they actually do all day? Where do they go? So I want to give you both the chance. Greg, you first. Global View, I was looking at your website, multicultural marketing. What do you do at Global View?
So, there's a couple of things. What we do is we go in and we help organizations to build strategies and tactics to reach out to the various diverse markets in whatever region that they're selling their goods and services in or engaging folks. What we really hope to do is to tie that strategy to the overall business objectives of the organization. And once again, it depends on the geography that they're operating in and the products and services that they're selling.
And Linda, for you, your consulting firm is Newton & Newton, but you're also heavily involved in an organization. You're both in diversity and inclusion professionals. A lot of major local employers, Amica, Blue Cross, Textron, Raytheon are all in there. Tell me about what you do day to day.
Well, day to day, I help companies, as Greg does, with developing a diversity strategy or an inclusion strategy. The Diversity and Inclusion Professionals organization is really a networking and professional development organization that I started back when I was employed at Blue Cross. I retired from there about 2 years ago. And it really provides a forum for professionals from all different academic, government, and business, a forum for them to network, provide community discussion, learn best practices.
So I want to start by asking, first of all, just to set the table here. I cover elections a lot of the time, and I was amazed when I was looking at the voting trends. We had 97% of the vote in the '96 presidential election, which was Bill Clinton's second term, was white voters in Rhode Island, 97%. Now the white votes was down to about 86% last year. So we see a significant shift, and that's just among voters, which isn't always the full other population. Greg, I'll start with you. Where are we now in terms of diversity? Who is Rhode Island and the Providence area at this point?
Well, I think that one of the ways that I would answer that question in terms of who is diversity is who do we acknowledge as being diverse? And that term has really evolved over the last, say, just in the last 10 or 15 years, forget about 20 or 25 years ago. 10 or 15 years, we looked at diversity primarily as race, ethnicity, and gender. There's a much broader definition of diversity right now in terms of preference, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of education, in terms of socioeconomic background, and then clearly political leanings. But I think that most organizations that look at population still tend to slice around race and ethnicity, and I'm not always sure that that's the most effective and efficient way to identify that audience. Clearly in Rhode Island, the largest ethnic population is Latino, but when you look a little bit deeper into that population, there are different segments, different political leanings, different preferences, different countries of origin, different age ranges, et cetera. So to sort of look at this in a macro kind of way just doesn't work anymore.
And Linda, I want to bring you in on that too. I want to also show people, we have a map here showing what the most diverse cities now are in Rhode Island. So share your perspective on this and people can see there.
Well, we do know that the non-Hispanic white population in Rhode Island overall is decreasing. In fact, I think it's the second slowest or population growth in terms of population growth. So we know that the non-Hispanic white population is decreasing, and yet the population is staying pretty much the same. And so the diverse communities, the communities of color, are growing. And we see it most dramatically in these major cities where the population in a city like Providence has reached a minority majority. So it's a significant shift. But I do think that it's not always apparent. If you're not in one of those cities, if you're not living in one of those cities, you might not realize how dramatic the shift has been over the last 10 years.
And Linda brings up an interesting point. So when you take a look at the data for the last 10 years, the white population in Rhode Island has actually decreased by about 8%. And the real explosion has been with the Hispanic population increasing by about 36%, followed by the Asian population at 22%, the African American black population at about 18%. So really what that means, you know, you asked the question at the beginning around what we do. What we try to get organizations to do is to realize that the environment in which they're operating in has fundamentally shifted. It is not shifting.
The shift has happened.
The shift has happened.
And is continuing to.
And it's continuing to happen. So how we engage, who we sell stuff to, how and who we communicate with, the differences amongst those groups, because no longer can we afford to engage in sort of a mass market approach. The differences in how we engage with those groups are really fundamental to success.
And Linda, yeah, we're getting up against a break, but people at home might say, well, why are we talking about this in a business show? But this is something you think, as you were starting to say there, Greg, businesses need to understand to succeed, right?
Absolutely, because I think what happens is because business is usually a short-term reward, they have a hard time, business leaders have a hard time at looking at the long-term and looking at demographic trends and responding to them in a timely manner because it's a long-term payoff. The problem is that once it catches up with you, it's caught up with you. And I think businesses are starting to realize that they're a little bit behind the 8 ball now and really need to begin to fast track their efforts to address communities of color and minorities.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about how they can do that and address these changes that are happening fast right under our feet here in Rhode Island. Stick with us. You're watching Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and my guest on this half of the show, I'm so pleased to have them, Greg Almieda of Global View Communications and Linda Newton of Newton & Newton, and also the organization Diversity and Inclusion Professionals. And Greg, we were talking before the break about the need to understand changing demographics, not just to be nice to people, but because there's there are customers there. Give us a sense of that.
So the economic impact in Rhode Island is really sort of interesting, and I think across the country, but let's just use Rhode Island as a microcosm. And when you just sort of look at buying power, and buying power is really sort of a funny figure because it's not income. Buying power is really about money that people have to spend after taxes. When you look at the shift in terms of the growth of buying power in Rhode Island, so there's about $48 billion worth of buying power that's spent on goods and services, commodities, et cetera, in the state. That's only grown in the last 5 years by about 26%. When you look at the African American population, though, it's about $2 billion worth of buying power. Within the last 5 years, it's grown about 46%. So it's growing at a much faster pace than sort of total buying power, whether you want to define total buying power as whites or just total buying power in the aggregate. So I think that what that tells us is that really sort of the trend in terms of people coming online to be new customers is really with the diverse population. So if whatever it is that whether it's a product or service that I'm selling, and Linda made an interesting point, now is the time, because of the shift, now is the time to really be engaging and learning as much as you can about your customers. And just to give you an example, we looked at 3 sort of main categories of everyday life. We looked at healthcare, food, and housing in terms of the money that is spent. And it's interesting, when you look at the healthcare category, African Americans spend about $34 million a year in Rhode Island. Asians spend about $21 million, but Latinos spend about $55 million on healthcare services, and that's health insurance, medical service, medical supplies, prescription drugs, et cetera. That's a fairly healthy market. That's a very hefty market. And I think that anybody that's in that space that's not engaging to try to get a piece of that is doing themselves a disservice.
And that goes to what I wanted to ask you about, Linda, which is, are there, when you two talk to a lot of companies, a lot of different organizations about what they're doing well, what they could maybe do better, are there mistakes you see frequently made or oversights maybe, not to rag on people, but?
Well, I think the biggest mistake is not looking at it as part of an overall business strategy, not taking it seriously as part of how they do business. So organizations will approach diversity and inclusion as a project or a one-off, as opposed to a committee or an event. Or an activity. Black History Month is, always
A
good.
Cinco de Mayo party,
Right.
yeah.
Right.
But when businesses look at the pipeline in terms of the market, and they look at their bottom line and how they're going to grow their business. As Greg was saying, in order to grow their business in Rhode Island, they have to look at the communities of color and take them seriously as having significant dollars. And they're leaving dollars on the table if they don't integrate and find strategies that incorporate communities of color and the distinctions that those communities are making in how they purchase. So, I think in the past, companies were successful in being able to sell in a homogenized way. But as the communities of color are growing and becoming more part of their own mainstream, they are not as likely to buy in a homogenized way, and are picking and choosing.
And that's one question I just had, which is Greg, would you say it's about different products, or is it about finding different ways to reach people about the products you already have, or is it both?
Well, good marketing is always about meeting an unmet need. And, at the end of the day, it's really about understanding your customers at a very, very granular level. I mean, we're in a whole new world right now, personalization, and in terms of how people are marketed to. Whether it's online or some of the other traditional methods. And Linda brings up an interesting point that you can't really take this sort of mass market approach when it comes to multicultural markets. Study after study after study has shown that that is a recipe for failure. And really what you need to do is have a deep understanding of the purchasing decisions, because the reason that I purchase something as a middle-aged African-American man may be very different than a middle-aged Latino man. And so what I need to do as a marketer is really sort of understand that and be in that person's life stage and in that person's world and be talking to them specifically about the value prop for buying a specific product or service.
And I have to get us to politics because we're coming up on the next break. But before we get to there, we have a chart, first of all, and you guys knew I love charts. So we're going to look at who voted in 2010, the last gubernatorial election in Rhode Island. And you see a real distinction here. The big red bar there is the white non-Hispanic population. And then from there, what does this tell us? I'll go back to you, Greg, first on this. What does this tell us about who voted, and how different do you think it'll be next year in 2014?
Well, I think to answer your last question first, I think that that's always predicated on the issue of the day or the issue of the moment, what the turnout is. But I also think there's a popularity component to this as well, and who folk know and who've been engaged with them over time. I think that what this tells me is that in terms of the Asian and the Latino population, we have a lot more work to do to get that vote out in non-presidential elections. And I think that any candidate that's smart enough to want to raise that participation and engage, once again, we go back to the word engage, and engage that group is going to reap the benefits of it. I think that historically African Americans have voted in greater numbers because of our history in this country and some of the things that go along with that. But the trend that I'd be looking at more closely is how much the white population vote declines.
Which we just saw last year in 2012, yeah.
Which is a real harbinger of the way things are going to come, the way things are going to go. Because the reality is the white population is dying off. The younger population are people of color, and we are fast coming to a situation in this state where the population numbers are going to be basically even. So there's not going to be many more white people to engage. There's going to be a lot more folk of color to engage.
And I think it's important for any politician not to write off any community. I think in the last presidential election, we did a panel, diversity and inclusion professionals did a panel on how do the 47% feel now? And that 47% is a lot of votes to just write off, right, and to say, we don't care about whoever falls into that category. And it wasn't necessarily all minorities, but certainly heavily weighted in terms of people of color. But a lot of people fall into that 47%. And I think it's a real lesson that all people need to be considered valuable and important to an election.
All right, well, that's all the time we have, but I want to thank Linda Newton, Greg Almieda so much for being here, and I want to definitely have you both back, especially as we get into an exciting election season coming up. When we come back, stick with us. A tech startup in Fall River has figured out a way to show you what's happening under the sea. Stick with us on Executive Suite. Welcome back to Executive Suite. I'm Ted Nisi, and I'm joined now by Durval Tavares. Did I get it right there?
You did.
All right. You know, I'm always worried that I'm going to get someone's name wrong. Now, you got to get people's names right on TV. So key. He is founder and CEO of Aquabotix, a startup in Fall River, and we have an example of your product right here. Tell us, what do you do at Aquabotix, Durval?
We actually produce several different products. This is one of the 4 products we produce.
And which one are we looking at?
We're looking at the HydroView. The HydroView is a underwater robotic vehicle, what they call a ROV, and it's a vehicle that you drive with an iPad. It has a tether that comes up to the top, and then from the iPad you can actually drive it left and right by moving the iPad. It allows you to experience and view the underwater world without actually being in the water itself.
And people seeing some of the video there that you can take right on it. What are the uses? Who's using this, and where are you finding the business model for
So
it?
we originally introduced the product back in 2012 at the Newport International Boat Show. And that's sort of where we introduced the first product we produced as well. So we have strong ties to Rhode Island. But the product initially was targeted towards recreational marine people that want to inspect the bottom of their boats, marinas, etc. And since then, we've introduced new products that are specifically targeting commercial. Everything from aquaculture to search and recovery missions to marine construction to potable water inspection. So a wide variety of uses that's gaining a lot of attention now.
So you have the HydroView, you also have the AquaLens, right?
The AquaLens is a drop camera that you put on a pole that you can drop down, and it has a live video that you have on the top that you can actually see we inspect the bottom.
So where did you get the idea for this originally? I think it was a friend of yours actually who needed this, right?
Yes. So when I founded the company back in March of 2011, one of the things that I wanted was to bring innovation to the underwater world. I've been involved in the underwater space for my whole life, and one of the things that I noticed is there's a lot of really cool technology, interesting technology that does not make its way there. So I founded the company to bring innovation into the underwater space. And my friend George had just finished going around the world on his sailboat, and one of the things he told me is even though he had beautiful places that he stayed at, he never had a restful night's sleep, mostly because he never knew if his anchors was well set or what the conditions of his boat was. A couple of times he hit something with the rudder, and he didn't know how badly damaged it was. So I said, George, I'm going to solve your problem. I'm going to get you something that you can inspect your boat, inspect your anchor, check underneath the water without having to get wet.
So I want to give people a little more about your background actually there. You weren't actually born in the United States, right?
That's correct. I was born in Portugal. I came as a 10-year-old immigrant boy, originally to Fall River, and then over to Somerset and grew up in the local area. Went to UMass. I worked at the Undersea Warfare Center for 20 years. Then I worked
Here in Newport.
Right in Newport. So strong ties to Newport and the underwater world.
And people are going to wonder, well, then why isn't your company in Fall River? In Rhode Island, excuse me. What attracted you to Fall River to start this out?
My first stop was actually in Rhode Island. So I stopped over by the economic development and said, look, I'm starting a business, looking for some help. I'd like to locate it in Rhode Island because there's a large, undersea research and development area. Did not get a lot of help there. Went over to Fall River. They actually were very helpful in terms of helping us to set up a business there. And so,
what sort of help did you get?
We got some financial loans, and also they assisted us in terms of finding some space and connecting us to the local business area.
You used, I think, it's the UMass Dartmouth. It's the Advanced Manufacturing Center they have there.
It's an incubation center. So one of the things they do is they provide help for startup businesses. We were there for the first 6 months of our business. They give you the infrastructure, networking, et cetera, to get you started. And then as we outgrew that, we actually ended up having our own facility, which we're in now.
Now, you're distributing this in different countries, but you're actually making a lot of the components locally.
Well, that's a great point. One of the things we wanted to do is the whole idea of selling globally, but working locally. So we tried to find as many of the providers in terms of components, service providers, manufacturing, all locally, everything from Connecticut to Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Vermont. We try to source as much as we can locally. It's built here in Massachusetts. So we try to hit as many as we can of the local businesses, but it's currently in 19 different countries. Half the product that we sell is actually international. So I think it's a great success story that we build something that we export everywhere from Australia to New Zealand to China, Hong Kong, Dubai, Europe, you name it, we're pretty much in those.
Now, I'm curious there. I would think that your friend George isn't the first person you need to see under his boat. I'm surprised. Is there a lot of competition in this space?
There is, but one of the things that we do something different. We founded the company on 3 basic principles, the 3 Ps, the people, planet, and profit, so that's important to us. But the thing that drives a lot of our technology is the whole concept of accessibility. And accessibility for us comes in 2 ways. One is make it easy to use, the whole idea behind the iPad. You don't need a driver's training class to learn how to use it. And also,
it's just an app.
Just an app. You download the app from the App Store and connect to it, and you start. The app is free, the vehicle is not. The other concept about accessibility is a price point that's affordable. So typically for something equivalent to this, you're looking at about 5 times the price point that this guy starts at.
How are you able to keep the cost down?
One is we engineered the product from scratch to be something that was easily assembled and common components, and our strategy is one of mass market as opposed to individual builds for the product.
You gave a TED talk at, they did a TEDx in New Bedford last year, and you had an interesting point. You talked about environmental stewardship, but looking at it through the consumer point of view and how consumers can be a part of that. Give me a sense, what was your point to the TEDx conference?
That's very astute, I didn't know either. The basic idea is, one of the things that we want is, where the P for planet comes in, is we believe that the more people know about the planet and what's underneath the water, the more they know about that, the more they have a love for it and the better care they'll take. And that was sort of the basic things behind the TED Talk is the more we know and understand about what goes underneath there, the better we'll take care of our planet.
How important is it between being in Fall River, you're also, we talk a lot about the maritime industries throughout the Providence metro area, out into Fall River and everything. How important is it to be part of an area where there's a significant amount of that going on? Does that matter to you, or could you be in North Dakota?
No, it's significant. It makes a huge difference. I don't think people realize how much of undersea research and development happens here on this little bit of the Northeast corridor. Everything starting from Woods Hole Institute coming down into Newport, Rhode Island, huge presence in terms of research and development, and we want to be part of that community. And so
only about 30 seconds left. What's next for Aquabotix? What are you looking at in the future, and what's going on?
Well, we're expanding from the consumer space over to very specific vertical markets, the ones that we mentioned in terms of aquaculture, potable water, etc. So really we're starting to make inroads into those markets. Those markets have pulled us into there, and we're gladly going into it with products that meet their needs.
Always nice to get the invitation to come on into the market and sell your wares. All right, well, we're going to keep an eye on Aquabotix, and that's all the time we have this week on Executive Suite. I want to thank you for being here, Durval. And I also want to thank my guests on the first half of the show, Greg Almieda and Linda Newton, for walking us through the changing demographics of the economy here in the Rhode Island area. If you missed any of this show or any other episode of Executive Suite, you can catch it all on our website, WPRI.com. We'll see you right back here next week on Executive Suite.